Candy Louise Martin was shot dead on February 16, 2001 in Dorchester County, South Carolina by a high school friend who threw her body in the trunk and set the car on fire, burning her body in the process. Marion Bauman Jr., the murderer, was taken into custody and accused of both murder and arson. Bauman, who killed Martin due to a financial argument, was convicted on both counts and given a death sentence for Martin's murder and a 10-year prison sentence for third-degree arson. Bauman, who had subsequently exhausted his appeals against the capital penalty, was killed by lethal injection on January 31, 2025, while he was incarcerated at Broad River Correctional Institution on death row. The body of 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin was discovered in the trunk of her car in Dorchester County, South Carolina on February 17, 2001. Court sources say that 20-year-old Marion Bauman Jr. was with his sister the previous day when he ran into Martin and her companions. According to reports, Bauman wanted to speak with Martin, a high school friend, so he requested his sister to stop the car. Bauman's sister claims that after asking Martin to give him back some cash, and Martin instructed him to wait until she had finished speaking, Bauman responded with, "That bitch be dead by dark." Bauman and his buddies had been partying at a residence that evening when Martin pulled up. Bauman got into her car with his cousin, James Taiwan Gadsden, and all of them drove to a distant location that Bauman had indicated. As they exited the vehicle, Gadsden claimed to have heard Bauman inform him that he wanted to kill Martin. Bauman then pulled out a revolver and fired 3 bullets while following Martin. According to reports, Martin hurried forward to confront Bauman and begged him to spare her life because she had a child to take care of. Bauman fired his gun twice and killed Martin despite her cries for mercy. Then he dragged her body into the bushes around it. Bauman drove Martin's car back to town after threatening Gadsden to keep the fact that he killed Martin a secret, even though he himself boasted about it to others, including Hiram Johnson. After failing to sell the car at the club, he spent the evening driving the vehicle around with other people. Bauman then asked another friend, Travis Felder, to assist him in returning the vehicle to the scene of the murder. Bauman parked the vehicle, then took Martin's body from a nearby bush and stuffed it into the trunk before setting the vehicle on fire. He admitted to Felder that he killed Martin while setting the car on fire. Both men then left the scene. Firefighters discovered Martin's burnt remains after responding to a complaint of a burning car at approximately 3:54 a.m. on February 17, 2001. After Bauman's DNA was discovered in Martin's private area, the police were able to connect him to the murder that same day in the afternoon, and they detained him as a suspect. Dorothy, Bauman's wife, discovered his firearm at home, and the next day an unidentified family member dumped it into the Edisto River from a bridge. Law enforcement later recovered it and identified it as the gun used in the murder. A grand jury formally indicted Marion Bauman Jr. in June 2001 on 1 count of murder and 1 count of third-degree arson. Bauman was put on trial before a jury on May 17, 2002. Walter Bailey led the prosecution. During the trial, Marva Hardy Thomas and Norbert Cummings Jr. represented Bauman. In addition to claiming that the gun might have been planted by investigators to further implicate Bauman as the murderer, the defense contended that Gadsden's testimony should not be believed because he and the other parties in the case had accepted plea deals and had a justification for identifying Bauman as the shooter. After 3 hours of discussion, the jury found Bauman guilty on both charges of murder and arson on May 24, 2002. Citing mitigating evidence that Bauman was raised in a chaotic household with a history of serious alcoholism in his mother's family, and that he started drinking alcohol at the age of 10 and even traded narcotics at the age of 14, the defense requested life in prison for Bauman. However, given the seriousness of the offenses and the aggravating circumstances, the prosecution requested the death punishment. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for the murder accusation, and Bauman was condemned to death on the same day of his verdict. Bauman was also found guilty of arson and given a 10-year prison sentence. Following their plea deals with the prosecution, Travis Felder and James Gadsden were also given reduced charges in court over Martin's murder. Gadsden received a 20-year prison term for both wrongdoing of a felony and accessory after the fact of murder, while Felder received a sentence of 3 years in prison, which was later changed to 3 years of probation. Marion Bauman challenged his death sentence to the South Carolina Supreme Court after receiving it. The Supreme Court denied Bauman's direct appeal on November 28, 2005. Bauman's second appeal was denied by the South Carolina Supreme Court on January 10, 2018, and his conviction and death sentence were maintained on March 26, 2010, when U.S. District Judge Terry L. Wooten of the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina denied his appeal. Bauman's appeal against the death penalty was denied by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals on August 16, 2022. His death sentence was ultimately upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, which denied his last appeal. Marion Bauman's case attracted the attention of civil and anti-death penalty organizations while he was on death row. In addition to stepping up attempts to secure clemency for him, the American Civil Liberties Union had taken up Bauman's cause and conducted an interview with him while he was incarcerated in an attempt to increase awareness of his case and narrative. However, in order to prevent the possible loss of private information or system security breaches, inmates were prohibited from speaking to the media, including in-person media interviews, or having their work directly published in accordance with South Carolina prison regulations. As a result, Bauman's interview tape from the ACLU was forbidden from being aired in the media. In order to address this matter, the ACLU petitioned the federal courts to overturn the ban, arguing that it infringed upon the prisoner's First Amendment rights to free speech and might have protected the South Carolina Department of Corrections from actual public scrutiny regarding potential instances of inmate abuse. The action was dismissed by U.S. District Judge Jacqueline D. Austin on September 5, 2024. The judge maintained that the media did not have special access to sources that should not be made public, and that the state retained the ability to prevent them from doing so. Bauman was one of several death row inmates who filed a lawsuit against the state of South Carolina in 2023, arguing that the electric chair and firing squad were unconstitutional because they were cruel and unusual punishments that would cause the condemned unnecessary pain and suffering. However, the state's attorney retorted that the firing squad and electric chair both adhered to current procedures and that the law did not require that death be immediate or painless. At that time, the lack of lethal injection drugs, the expiration of the state's current drug supplies, and the refusal of several drug companies to sell their drugs to the state for executions resulted in an unofficial moratorium on executions in South Carolina since the state's last execution in 2011. The state government responded to this issue by reintroducing the electric chair and passing new legislation allowing firing squad execution as a backup method of execution in the event that lethal injection was not available. Finally, in September 2023, the state was able to acquire new medication to resume lethal injection execution. A 5-judge panel of the South Carolina Supreme Court rendered its final decision on July 31, 2024, affirming the constitutionality of both the firing squad and the electric chair. The majority of the judges approved the two methods, 4 for the electric chair and 3 for the firing squad. This ruling made it possible for all 32 of the state's death row convicts, including Bauman, to have their executions resumed in South Carolina. 5 condemned prisoners, Bauman, Freddie Eugene Owens, Richard Bernard Moore, Brad Sigmund, and Mikal Mahdi, had exhausted their appeals at the time of this decision and were most likely about to be executed. After one of the 5 prisoners, Freddie Owens, was executed on September 20, 2024, the 13-year moratorium on South Carolina was eventually concluded. Richard Moore was put to death on November 1, 2024, after Owens. Since Bauman was given a death sentence in 2002, it was anticipated that he would be the next condemned prisoner to be put to death. Since Moore was executed, it was assumed that Bauman would be put to death on December 6, 2024, 5 weeks later, and that a death warrant would be issued on November 8, 2024, a Friday, as the state frequently issued death warrants on Fridays. Nevertheless, that date was not the execution date. Bauman and the other 3 convicted prisoners on the execution schedule list reportedly appealed to the state on November 11, 2024, requesting that their executions be postponed until after Christmas and New Year's Day in order to avoid the winter holiday. The South Carolina Supreme Court agreed to give the prisoners a short reprieve on November 14, 2024, and to refrain from issuing any more death warrants until at least January 3, 2025. Bauman and the other 3 inmates on the death row had their possible execution dates rescheduled to 2025 as a result of this agreement. Bauman's death warrant was signed by the South Carolina Supreme Court on January 3, and his execution date was set for January 31, 2025. Bauman was sentenced to death by firing squad, lethal injection, or electric chair, and he was granted until January 17 to choose one of the 3 means of execution. He ended up choosing lethal injection. Bauman was close to Richard Moore, whom he saw as a father figure. Moore, who was executed back in November, taught Bauman to read and play chess, taught him coping mechanisms for the harsh conditions of prison, and encouraged him to avoid worrying about things that were out of his control while he was on death row. The family of Candy Martin responded to Bauman's planned execution by saying that, although they would not be present, they saw it as a measure of justice and closure following the loss of Martin 24 years prior. They said that Bauman had 24 years to continue to connect with his own family, including his daughter and granddaughter, from behind bars, and the family believed Bauman was indeed the real killer, dismissing his claims of innocence. Martin did not have the chance to spend time with her son and become a grandmother. Her son was just 2 years old when she was killed. Marion Bauman filed an appeal to overturn his conviction on the basis of prosecutorial misconduct on December 17, 2024, while his death warrant was still pending in court. Bauman argued that the prosecution's failure to reveal important evidence during his trial, such as the psychological issues and potential confession of one trial witness, as well as the criminal charges pending against another trial witness, hindered his right to a fair and impartial trial and effectively cast doubt on the legality of his conviction and sentence. Additionally, they claimed that Bauman's trial attorneys failed to appropriately defend Bauman, an African American, because they were showing sympathy for the victim, which was a white woman. Bauman also requested that his death sentence be reduced to life in prison without a possibility of parole. His attorney produced signed testimony from a number of former nurses and death row employees who characterized him as a kind giant who had a unique talent for helping mentally ill prisoners engage with psychologists and take their medications as prescribed. For many years, Bauman was the official point of contact between prison officials and death row convicts. Bauman acknowledged having relations with Martin and selling her narcotics in a public statement on January 2, 2025, but he insisted he didn't kill her. He requested on January 8, 2025, that his execution date be postponed until his appeal regarding the constitutional violations of his trial was concluded. His appeal was dismissed by the South Carolina Supreme Court on January 17. Bauman requested additional details regarding the pentobarbital used for fatal injection executions in South Carolina in a different appeal submitted on January 23. Citing Richard Bernard Moore's autopsy results, he voiced his worries that the lethal injection execution in his case would not proceed smoothly. According to the findings, Moore felt as like he was drowning and suffocating throughout the 23 minutes that led to his death, since fluid was discovered in his lungs. In addition, it was disclosed that Moore received 2 substantial doses of pentobarbital, separated by 11 minutes, and Bauman said he needed further details and explanation. The state prosecutors also noted that Bauman could not have chosen the firing squad or electric chair if he had been genuinely worried about the consequences of lethal injection, and an anesthesiologist said that it was typical to find fluid inside the lungs of executed prisoners, particularly those who received lethal injection. On January 28, U.S. District Judge Jacqueline Austin heard the appeal and dismissed it, ruling that Bauman was not entitled to more information about the drugs that would be used in his lethal injection execution. She also said that Bauman could still choose to be executed by firing squad or electric chair if he really had doubts about the effectiveness of the lethal injection drugs. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his last appeal on January 30, 2025, the eve of his scheduled execution. Bauman, through his attorney, then declared that he would not ask South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster for clemency, saying he would prefer not to live out the rest of his days behind bars for a crime he insisted he never committed. Bauman's family, however, begged the governor for clemency, as he was the only one with the authority to commute his death sentence to life in prison if he agreed. The governor decided to not grant clemency. On January 31st, Bauman glanced at his lawyer across the glass in the witness room for a moment when the curtain to the death chamber opened, then turned back to the ceiling and closed his eyes. He looked up and opened his eyes once more. Bauman puffed his lips as he exhaled once his lawyer had done reading his final statement and poem, which lasted 3 minutes. Those gasps stopped less than a minute later. After 20 minutes, a stethoscope-wielding doctor put a hand on his neck and listened to his chest. Bauman noted in his closing remarks that although death row inmates may be known as the worst of the worst, they have all evolved and matured after their life-altering event. His last words were, "I know that Candy's family is in pain. They are justifiably angry. If my death brings them some relief and ability to focus on the good times and funny stories, then I guess it will have served the purpose. I hope they find peace." His last meal was fried seafood, including shrimp, fish, and oysters, chicken wings and tenders, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, cranberry juice, and pineapple juice. For the month of February, there are 4 people scheduled to be executed, 2 in Texas, 1 in Alabama, and another one in Florida. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.